Final Exam, an Avatar The Last Airbender fanfiction. Chapter 6.
Making his first appearance of the day on the bridge, Prince Zuko stared blearily out of the eastern-facing window of his northward-bound ship. His men were quiet. They had learned from experience not to disturb the teen before the sun had risen a minimum of 2 handbreadths from the horizon. Like all firebenders, Zuko's powers rose with the sun. The prince himself would have preferred to sleep in a little, but with the importance of his quest and all that was riding on it, he had adopted an early morning wake-up regimen. It worked fine, so long as no one talked to him for the first hour or so. Suddenly, his gaze jerked skyward as a rapid tapping sound echoed from down the ceiling of the bridge. Footsteps? Oblivious to the lack of reaction on the part of his men, he lurched to the window just in time to see a brown and tan blur vaulting over the railing that surrounded the small upper deck. A rope tied to the rail wiggled and vibrated as the figure rapidly rappelled down the control tower of his ship. Upon reaching the deck, his guest sprinted full speed to the point of the bow, hurtling over a variety of storage boxes on her way. At the very tip of the ship, she whirled in reverse direction at a sprint, disappearing down the midship hatch into the hold, and leaving one very flabbergasted prince to stare at the box-strewn shambles that had once been his pristine deck.
What? What is she doing?
He gestured angrily towards the makeshift, unauthorized obstacle course. Iroh, who was a true dawn riser, blew the steam off his second cup of morning tea.
Exercising, I believe.
At this hour? And who told her she could do that on my ship?
Since the sky was light enough to see by, actually.
Iroh's matter-of-fact tone couldn't hide the subtle trace of humor. His golden eyes sparkled as he spoke.
And you gave her permission when you agreed to Headmaster Zorin's terms that Shiori's training would not be interfered with.
As usual, Zuko's irritation was sparked to higher levels by his uncle's inexplicable ability to find humor in the oddest of situations.
She's an archer. I thought training meant shooting arrows. Besides, isn't she a child prodigy or something? I'm surprised she even has to practice.
I believe the shooting of arrows comes later, Prince Zuko. And the Yuyan aren't merely archers. They are the world's best archers. Symmetra Island's training program is one of the harshest a Fire Nation youth can endure. The few who graduate must prove themselves not only as archers, but as physically elite hunters that can track down any prey. Isn't that why you wanted one?
The retired general gracefully gestured towards the stern of the ship with his cup of tea. Zuko glanced out of the small round porthole to find Shiori had emerged from the ship's bowels and was now scaling the tower with the aid of another thin rope.
I think her dedication is admirable.
The prince could feel his expression hardening and kept his back to his uncle. Shiori was just like her. It wasn't good enough for her to be born talented. She had to show off by practicing harder than anyone else too. He felt the familiar sentiments of resentment and anger beginning to swell within him. Just what he needed in his life. Another Azula.
Make her stop, and have her clean up her mess before reporting to me.
Prince Zuko.
Iroh's voice had adopted the firm tone he used only when his nephew was unacceptably out of line.
A man of honor keeps his word. You should not interfere with Shiori's training.
Unless I need her for my quest. Make her stop and have her report to me, Uncle. It's time she learns who she's up against.
You've got to be kidding, right?
Shiori stared at the wanted poster Prince Zuko had handed her as the older teen paced restlessly back and forth in a small chamber. The image on the scroll was that of a young boy. His head was clean-shaven, his limbs decorated in twisted arrows, and he was dressed in the garb of a monk. In other words, he looked completely innocuous. Belying his image, the words on the scroll proclaimed the boy to be none other than the Avatar, a master airbender whose very existence threatened everything 3 generations of Fire Lords had struggled to achieve. Shiori couldn't believe it. The Avatar? But no one had seen him in 100 years. In fact, she had been taught that the cycle had ended with Avatar Roku back in the Fire Lord Sozin's time. And why was he just a boy? Confused, she shifted her gaze to Zuko.
Don't be fooled by his appearance, and don't underestimate him. He really is a master airbender. That will make your job all the more difficult.
Do you want me to kill him?
Despite her best efforts to the contrary, Shiori felt her facial expression shifting to one of disapproval. Sure, she was an accomplished hunter. Survival training was an integral part of learning to be a Yuyan, but she had never been asked to kill a person before. And this was a child.
I need to capture him alive. Only then can I return home.
The boy's voice trailed off as he stared at the Fire Nation insignia hanging from his wall. With the prince's back to her, Shiori allowed herself to feel a surprising amount of relief at his declaration. She frowned down at the floor. Thus far, her only consideration had been to graduate from the difficult Sumatra Island training program. Afterward, she would be reunited with Keisuke. She hadn't given a single thought on what her life as a Yuyan would actually be like.
We are weapons, Shiori. We don't care who we are pointed at, or why.
I suppose I'll be expected to kill. A lot.
A flash of green and tan, exhausted, tear-filled eyes pleading with her as shaking hands slowly rose over his head. The feeling of confusion as the pleasurable spike of triumph became polluted with pity. Shiori shook her head slightly, shaking her memories away.
Well, it doesn't really matter. It's just another target. I can be a weapon. Besides, any old archer can kill. The Yuyan are special because they can deliberately not kill.
Slightly reassured, she looked up just in time to see Zuko recovering from his own reverie. She could look him in the eyes now without her gaze drifting, although his scar was still one of the most horrible things she had ever seen.
The scroll mentions that he travels with 2 teenagers from the Southern Water Tribe. A boy and a girl. The boy is a fool.
Zuko's one good brow furrowed down as he chose his words with care.
But don't underestimate him. He can be an unpredictable factor in a fight. The girl, she's a waterbender. She isn't trained, but she can be troublesome. The Avatar has picked up some waterbending too, although he relies mainly on his air.
Zuko clasped his hands behind his back and resumed pacing. He had come so close to capturing Aang so many times, only to be thwarted by 2 peasants he traveled with. And the bison! Stupid flying hairball. He was the reason Zuko always had to play catch-up with the Avatar. It was unbelievably frustrating, and now, thanks to his stint as the Blue Spirit, he knew Zhao was close too. Beyond close, as Zhao had actually accomplished his goal, until Zuko had out of necessity interfered. He glanced down at the kneeling archer, her brown eyes flickered between him and the wanted poster. So he knew she was paying attention, even if she had thus far remained silent on the subject. Would she really be enough to make a difference? One single trainee versus however full-fledged Yuyans Zhao had under his command. Not to mention his multitudes of ships and legions of men. Zuko scowled, not liking the defeatist turn to his thoughts. Frustration welling up, he turned to fully face the kneeling girl. It wasn't as if it was the weather he was discussing. It was his entire future. Why was she so quiet? Couldn't the so-called elite archer show a little interest?
Well?
The girl mutely raised an eyebrow at him.
Say something!
Shiori blinked up at the prince.
Say what?
Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. Her entire expression turned hostile as she matched glares with the irritable hair. This was a trap if she had ever seen one. To remain silent was disobeying, a direct violation of her orders. However, speaking without directly being queried was dangerous as well. Shiori was well aware of the fact that her impulsive rebuttals were the very reason she was stuck serving Zuko.
You're trying to trick me, to make me fail. Even Shiyun wouldn't sink this low. He may be strict, but he's never unfair.
Their glaring match was interrupted by a gentle call from the door.
Is everything all right in there? I heard yelling.
Not waiting for a response, the retired general's gray head poked into the room. His rotund body followed, arms laden with 2 trays containing a variety of steaming hot foods.
I brought breakfast. A man needs proper nourishment to start the day off right. Young ladies too.
The elder man chuckled to himself, then fell silent as the thick tension in the room failed to dissipate.
What seems to be the trouble, Prince Zuko?
She's not taking this seriously.
Zuko jabbed an accusatory finger at the kneeling girl, whose eyes first widened, then narrowed into slits at this unfair assessment. Her mouth fell open, an involuntary sound escaping before she managed to clamp it shut again. Lips thinned and turned white under the pressure.
No, I won't fall for this trap. I won't.
I know you're not a mute. Capturing the Avatar is my destiny. This mission will restore my rightful place on the throne. Why don't you have something to say?
The prince emphasized his words with an abrupt sideways gesture. Fire trailed after his clenched fist as he noted with satisfaction that the high and mighty Yuyan want-to-be flinched away from it.
Ah, Prince Zuko, I think I can explain.
Iroh literally interjected himself between the teens, still balancing the trays of food.
Yuyan trainees are forbidden to speak unless they are asked a specific question by their instructors. She isn't ignoring you so much as adhering to her role as an apprentice. Isn't that right, Shiori?
Yes.
Her eyes were anything but soft as she stared at Zuko's hands. She was watching for more firebending, he realized. Her own hands clenched into tight fists on her knees. Suddenly, he was grateful that the girl wasn't in possession of her weapon.
There, you see? This is just a misunderstanding. Why don't we sit down and enjoy our food, Prince Zuko?
Not waiting for a response, the older man began setting down his trays on Zuko's sole table. Zuko sighed, his irrational anger dissipating. There were times he believed that his uncle, left to his own devices, would solve all of the world's problems with food and tea. His mentor's golden eyes gave him a pointed look, and then glanced deliberately between the food and the still kneeling archer. What he wanted was obvious, and it was a good solution. Princes did not apologize to peasants.
Join us for breakfast. Please.
The brown-haired girl silently rose to her feet, giving Zuko a wide berth. She settled back down at the table. Zuko followed suit, feeling an unprincely amount of embarrassment over his demonstrative behavior. It had given him pleasure when she had flinched away from his firebending. Now that emotion quickly turned into a dissatisfying feeling of shame.
Uncle should have told me sooner.
Oddly enough, now that he knew how to elicit a response from the girl, he found that he wanted to do nothing of the sort. Instead, he discussed potential destinations with his uncle and fell into a comfortable routine of bickering about portion sizes and the appropriate divvying up of food between them. The girl he ignored, although he made sure she received her fair share of the food. For her part, the Yuyan trainee remained silent and kept her eyes cast downward, a picture-perfect subordinate. A few times, however, he caught a glimpse of them raised, and he imagined that he saw something dancing behind those red-brown orbs, something that made him glad that she was unable to speak without his permission.
Final Exam was written by Magnusrae. Avatar The Last Airbender is owned by Nickelodeon, Michael Dante DiMartino, and Brian Konietzko. The narrator for this story is Samantha White. The voice of Zuko is DCODE. The voice of Iroh is Jake Mate. The voice of Shiori is Drew Hill. The voice of Zorin is Genndy C.O.G. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.